Hi everyone, and welcome to the Gimme Cloud Talk Azure event on Azure Day 2025. Sorry I couldn't be there live because I had to present at another event in the Netherlands, but welcome at my session Empowering Organizations with Reusable Bicep Modules and Automatic Deployments. Before we kick into some real world scenarios, let me first introduce myself. I'm Maik van der Gaag. I'm a CTO at 350, a consultancy company in the Netherlands, where I do a lot of consultancy work regarding the Azure platform and Azure infrastructure as code. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP, and as mentioned before, I live in the Netherlands. So let's kick in and look at some real world scenarios. So as you can see here in this example, companies have applications. For example, they have an applications where they use a Cosmos DB, Azure Configuration Management, and Azure Functions. And over time, when they construct these applications, they will get another application. That application 2 in this example uses Azure Functions as well, maybe also a SQL database. And over time, the application landscape will grow, and another application and another application will be built into that organization. As you can see here, we now have a landscape of 4 applications where they all share different services to be used. Um, but how do you really manage that and make sure that you can reuse infrastructure as code, for example, in these kind of scenarios? So basically, this is where Bicep comes in. So for the people that do not know what Bicep is a domain-specific language that's created for the Azure platform. Um, Before Bicep, we had Azure ARM as the infrastructure as code language for Azure. But Bicep is really a transparent abstraction on top of ARM to make it very simple. Bicep itself is open source and it's licensed. But if we really want to reuse those Bicep languages, and maybe you already have used Bicep in your organization or created some Bicep files yourself, and you want to start reusing it, of course you can copy over your files to a colleague of yours, maybe place them on the internet, copy them into your repository, reuse that bicep file again. Maybe a week later, you copy it again, you copy it in another repository, and after time, when something is changed, one of the properties needs to be different, for example, um, you have to go through all your Git repositories, all your folders where you have that specific bicep file. So basically, this is where a bicep module comes in. A bicep module itself is nothing more than just a simple bicep file where you have a specification for a specific resource or a pattern of resources that are working and combined together in one bicep file. And mainly how I see them, there are a piece of code that you can reuse. It's a contract to other files, and basically the contract is made by using parameters and outputs. Um, and it's really that simple. It's just a regular bicep file. So it's just a regular bicep file that you, for example, have on your file system. What's a good note to make here as well is that um, when bicep is transformed to ARM, now like it's done in the background nowadays, um, the module itself will be a nested deployment resource. So I've showed you some things already in slides. So let me now just go to a piece of demo where you can see this live in action. So for example, here I have a storage.bicep file. It's a very simple file where I have one parameter for the location, I have a parameter for the name, and of course I have the specific storage account. So it's very simple, very easy, a very simple bicep file. So for example, if I would want my colleagues to create a storage account as well, nowadays you would just send over the file, they will use the file, um, and, and create the resource on top of that. But what you could do now, and basically make a file reference, and instead of using the resource keyword like you normally do with creating resources, you now use the module keyword. So basically what you can see here, I have a module keyword, I have a reference name called storage account, and I basically point it to that specific bicep file. And then I have to supply the specific parameters. So if I would check here as well, I also have the intelligence in place where I can specify the specific location I want. So for example, I could make it West Europe. This is how easy it is to just start over and create modules within your code. So for example, if we now would look at what Bicep does to this piece of code, main.bicep, like I've mentioned in the slide, when it's transpiled, let me just save the file because there was a fault in there. So when it's compiled to, I'm in the wrong folder. Let me just do it correctly. Just not looking at. So if it's compiled to basically an ARM template, as you can see here now, the deployment of that specific module is a nested deployment, and it's basically what you can see here. So this is the template, and in this template I have a resource, and basically the type of that resource is a resources slash deployments. So it's a sub deployment basically in that specific template. So for now, let's just move back to the slides and see how that can end up. So we mentioned these different applications before. So we have basically modules that we can save in, for example, a modules folder, and we can save the specific application where we have that combination of modules in an application of Bicep folder. Like you can imagine, if I have one application, that's being fine. I have one repository, one folder location. But when I have 2, 3, or 4 applications that are basically all do the same thing, I still have copies of files. And that's basically what that you do not want. Because still, if you need to change something on one file, um, you need to change it on 4 different locations, making it a very bad practice working with modules. So that's basically also where you need to think of, okay, but why do I want to share my Bicep modules within your organization? That's basically very easily to answer because you do not want to redo all your efforts you have created for specific resources. So in many organizations, there are a lot of resources that are reused. For example, a VM, an Azure function, um, and you do not want to recreate those infrastructure as code files over and over again for each project. And in organizations, um, you also have specific settings that you do not want to forget when you are copying it over. Also, the Bicep modules, you want to use that to make some discoverability of those modules within your organization. And later on during this demonstration, you will see why you want to have that discoverability, because then basically you are really reusing everything you create. You are reusing the modules, you are not redoing the effort, and basically you can also work towards company approved resources or certified resource, how we sometimes call them at organizations as well, where or, where some organizations have really strict security requirements and you do not want to forget specific security requirements. So you can make sure with a module, for example, that it's approved by your specific security department. So when, for example, a function needs to be created, you can pick up the module that's certified by your security department and create that in Azure. When you have a new resource that's, for example, not already in your modules registry, you can create it, run it through the security department, and then share that certified service within your organization. This really helps DevOps teams to improve and scale, but also make the deployment of resources very easily and also very fast as well, because they do not have to go through the security department on every deployment they are doing. So we have seen the folder options. So you could deploy them in specific folders and copy it over, but that, as said, that's a bad practice. So what are then your options for sharing your modules? So basically there are two main options nowadays to share these modules. You can do it by using a Bicep registry. And basically when using a Bicep registry, um, it's intended to combine your modules for one specific application. So for example, mainly in a registry, you would have specific modules per resource. Like I showed you in the first demonstration where I have a module of a storage account, that would basically be one module in your registry. And if you create another resource, for example, application insights, you would have a resource for application insights inside a specific registry. All those modules, when using a Bicep registry, are saved as a container artifact. And the cool things that you have with a container with using a Bicep registry, um, and that's basically a container registry, you also have specific access controls. So as it's the container registry itself is an Azure resource, you can leverage um, default role-based access control on that registry, meaning that you also have control over who has access to a specific registry. And the other cool thing is that a container registry could be placed within your internal network, really making sure that people from the outside cannot reach your registry and cannot use your modules, and it's only used for internal use. The other option is Azure Template Specs. Azure Template Specs are another very well-known Azure resource, but basically it's a resource that you can use to um, deploy specific resources um, in the portal from an ARM template or a Bicep template, how you specify them, and give that control to an end user that can log into the Azure platform. So, for example, you could give a customer the permissions to create a VM based on a template you have created. That's why it's also specified here that it's a complete unit of deployment. And as it's also a resource in the Azure platform, you also have the capability to use role-based access control. Uh, and the main thing here is that you have that specific access control per template spec, where with the Bicep registry, which is a container registry, you have that for that specific container registry. Within the template spec option, you have that specific control per template spec. Another thing about the template specs is that they are still ARM, but if you are smart, you create your templates via Bicep, then make sure that they are compiled to ARM before you send them to the Azure platform. So let's look at an example of that. So here I have my own Azure portal. And as you can see here, I have some template specs here. So if I would just check, see more, as you can see here, there are a couple of template specs I already created. So for example, I have here an easy temp spec called Secured Web App. And the template specs, like I've mentioned before, is a specific template that can be used by people that have access to the Azure platform, and that they can deploy the specific template to a specific location where they have access within Azure. So as you can see here, I can choose my own specific resource groups, my subscriptions, and it's all based on role-based access control. And you can also make sure that there are parameters already filled in for the people. As you can see here, if I click on main template, you can just see the specific template that's used for this as well. So this is a very large actually template spec with just an ARM template in it as well. And as you can see here, it's all created by the use of Bicep. So basically this is a way to store modules in Azure. And the other way to store your modules is using a registry. Let me just find my Bicep registry. So as you can see here, it's just a regular container registry in my Azure platform. And if we go to the repositories, you can see that I have multiple repositories. And basically each repository now represents a specific module. So I have, for example, I have a module for the SQL Server. I can click this open and I see that I have one version. Cool thing about this as well, and that you also have that with the template specs, is that it's completely versioned. So you have specific versions, so you have backwards compatibility, and people can choose the version themselves. One disadvantage of the container registry, in the container registry itself, you cannot view your specific modules. So as you can see here, this is not the module code for that specific module. So you a few demos before, you have seen me use a module that's on my file system. I've done that by just going to the file reference. When using a Bicep registry or a template spec, that's really different. So you really, when using a Bicep registry, you have to start with BR, then point it to your specific registry, maybe then to your specific folder or your module path that you have, and then basically adding your tag. So that's basically your version. With template specs, you begin with TS, you point it to your specific template spec alias, and then your template spec, and then to your version. And then it should work when using that all together. But then, of course, you also need to publish those specific modules you have, which are just simple files, to your specific registry. So here are some examples of using the different options. The first one is an option when using the Bicep, the PowerShell version. It's basically just doing a publish AZ Bicep module. The other one is AZ Bicep publish using the Azure CLI. And the other one is just using the Bicep CLI directly pointing to the specific registry to publish your modules. And basically one thing to be sure is that when using modules, make sure that your process that's going to publish has the ACR push permissions on that container registry. And when deploying your Bicep files that contain specific modules that are in a registry, you need to make sure that the process has the permissions to do an ACR pull. Otherwise, you are not able to pull the modules in. So let's go to another demo and basically see this in action. So let's jump back to Visual Studio Code. Let me just close this all up. And let me check. These are basically my own modules. Let me check where I have the registry option. These are my template specs. And these are the used modules. So what you can see here, let me just start with the BR modules. Here you can see that I have a BR and I point it directly to my Bicep registry, just pointing it to the specific URL, then pointing it to the modules because I have a modules registry, and then basically to a storage account. As you can see, a few lines up, I use the exact same module, but then with another basically alias description. I use br slash my registry storage account 0.01. These two are the exact same module, but they are referenced differently. And it's all because of the different configurations you can do. So by default, you are able to do this, as this points directly to the exact place where your module stays. But you're also able to specify specific aliases within your bicep config file. So as you can see here, I have a module alias for BR, so that's the bicep registry, called my registry, that points to the specific URL and also to a specific module path. So basically, using this syntax, I'm not required to fill in the complete name anymore. And I have the same for TS, where I point it to specs, to my specific subscription, and then to my specific resource groups. So if I go to the template specs, you can see here that I have the exact same thing, but then TS, specs, double point, and then the specific spec name. Um, so in this way, you are not anymore required to copy over your module file, so you can use an online registry to build your bicep code. And what the cool thing is if I just type in module, I do module test, and I have complete intelligence for my registry, even public, and also TS spec. So it really picks up the information that's online and configured in your bicep config, and also within your module registries for template specs, and even also for the bicep registry, you also have complete intelligence on top of your modules. So as you can see here, this module also has a storage SKU, which isn't required because it has default values. So basically now, how do you really incorporate it then in your business? Because you have to create and then check your models, you have to document them, and you also have to deploy them as well. So this is basically where a neat process needs to be incorporated within the company to make sure that this all works together and is built as well. So let me demonstrate how this process could work within an organization. So in this repository, I also have a pipelines folder, which basically points to um, Azure DevOps Pipelines, where I have some Bicep build and Bicep deploy pipelines that I use to construct my code and also build my Bicep files. And basically what I do here is I do a specific infrastructure as code scan so that I check my modules. I have a documentation generation step. So basically based on all the information placed in the bicep file, I automatically generate my documentation. So there's no need for me to write any documentation anymore. Um, I build and analyze it further, and I just place them in an artifact. So for example, if I would open up my Azure DevOps environment and show you the pipelines as well, you will see that I have basically two main pipelines. One that basically builds and constructs my module templates, and I have one that deploys them. And as you can see now, the demo gods are not with me. Let me check if the service is completely out or not. No, it's not out. It just had a hiccup, I think. So let's just continue with the demonstration if it works or not. Yeah, there it is. So if I go to my MSFT minus bicep project, you see I have some documentation. If I would go to pipelines, you can see that I have a BR deploy modules and a BR build modules. And if I would open this up, you can also see that I have the analyze script, documentation, and I publish them as a specific artifact. If I would go to the deploy part, it has two specific stages. One to release the modules, and basically this releases that to the Bicep registry in this example, and you can see it here as well, and the specific steps. So basically, this is the login, and basically this process checks based on the metadata specified on the Bicep files if it's a new version or not. If it's a new version, it will deploy the specific module. If it's not a new version, it will just skip over that specific version and continues. And the other one will deploy the documentation. And basically, the documentation itself is completely created in Markdown. And basically, we create that specific documentation um, right on top of the metadata of the specific file. So if we would go to the wiki, we have a module section in here, for example, and let me just check the app configuration. And this is basically all built on top of the information and metadata specified on the specific file. So for us, there is no specific need um, to create additional documentation and work together on that. And this also makes sure that your modules are discoverable within your organization, and you not have to redo effort. So you can point users to that specific module registry and also to that specific module documentation that you have on Azure DevOps. Um, so it's also good to mention that Microsoft also works on the Azure Verified modules. And basically, this is a repository like a Bicep registry that you can maintain your own, but this is one completely maintained by Microsoft. Um, and you can use these AVM modules, which are there in specific pattern modules. So, for example, you have AKS, AVD, and you also have resource modules. All of these modules in here are completely created by Microsoft, and they are also owned by Microsoft. So if you really want to have adjustments, you have to make um, specify issues within GitHub to work with that. And basically, these Azure verified modules are not only there in Bicep, but they also are there for Terraform, and it's for you to use. So that really make sure that you do not have to create these modules yourself, but that then you can use the AVM modules. But in some cases, it's sometimes also handy to create your own modules and share them within your organizations. So, for example, we have some organizations where we create the modules because we want to incorporate the naming conventions within the specific modules to make sure that people do not have to think about the specific naming conventions. So I can shortly demo this as well. If we just go to aks/ms/avm, we get the Azure Verified Modules website where you can see the specific resource modules and also the specific modules. And these are directly there for you to use and accompany within your applications and within your infrastructure as code. Um, Basically getting to the end of my session. So if you want to get started, these are some specific links. The code you have seen here is completely on my GitHub repository. So for you to use, also a link to the Azure Verified modules. And that basically leaves me in thanking you for looking at this recording. Hope to see you someday in a live event. So if you want to contact me, you can use one of these options. And also link with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.